Well, okay. Hi. Uh, Time for another dispatch. It's the beginning of the week. It's sunny, which is really nice. On Friday, it was not sunny. Can you hear me? It was Friday was it was cloudy and cold and snowy. It was the opening of the 15th anniversary painting project student work show. It was a blast. It was great. Thank you to everyone that came and who brought work. That was good. It was local, but I'm thinking about how to do something online, which would be great. Um, anyway, it was great. But it was cold and snowy, and now it's brisk and sunny. Anyway, I'm slowing down, which is really good. I don't know what it's like for all of you, but for me, it just feels like there I'm in the middle of some kind of enormous shift, change, I mean, sure, globally, America, for sure. But also in my little life. I don't know. It just feels like I'm in the middle of a reorientation of some kind, like a serious. Oh, also, those of you that were wondering whatever happened to my camera settings and all that, if I ever figured it out, I did. I got a new camera app, Open Camera. It's a lot better. It's like, oh, anyway, I don't think I mentioned it. Maybe I mentioned it. You don't really. Anyway, I should probably stop meandering and read something of worth. So, the reading group we're reading Soutine, this long essay. It's an introduction to a book on Soutine by Andrew Forge that came out in 1960. That's crazy. That's 65 years ago, for God's sakes. Anyway, this is the book. The reproductions are awful. It's old, and they just don't have really good black and white things. But the writing is fabulous. So I wanted to start with that, and probably next week, and maybe we'll see how it goes. I just love reading as writing. But there's only so much you can read online, and it's like, okay, you can stop now. So, but all right. And there's this beautiful section in there. Maybe next week I'll just skip to it. Maybe we'll see. Okay. So 19th century Russia treated its Jewish population as a hated parasite. Anti-Semitism was built into the Russian legal system. Jews were subject to arbitrary laws which deprived them of the rights of property, of their own institutions, of their own identity. They lived under a constant threat of conscription, deportation, or punitive taxation. Only a few jobs were open to them. They could only live in certain areas on the fringes of Russia itself. One of these areas was the Pale of Settlement, the provinces that ran along Russia's western boundary from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The Pale was a vast rural ghetto, the scene of an immeasurable misery, which reached its climax with the promulgation of the so-called May Laws of 1882. It was from this fear-drenched background that Soutine emerged to follow his arbitrary and mysterious desire to paint. Smilovici, the Lithuanian village where he was born, the 10th son of the village tailor, was absolutely without culture. Well, maybe painting culture. I'm sure it had other culture, but not painting culture. The very thought of painting pictures was heretical in such an orthodox community. And from the first, Soutine was made to know that he was sinning. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. His struggle to find ways of breaking the second commandment is part of his legend. He stole from the household to buy a colored pencil and was locked up in the cellar as punishment. He made a drawing of the village idiot, then asked the rabbi to pose for him. The aftermath reads like a parable. The rabbi's son beat him up severely. The rabbi paid Soutine's mother damages, and with the money, he was able to leave Smilovici to study at art school. He was at the academy at Vilna for 3 years. Then, in 1913, when was he born? We don't know here. Doesn't say. Then, in 1913, with the help of a doctor who had taken an interest in him, he left Lithuania for France. Once in Paris, he enrolled at the École des Beaux-Arts, joining the Atelier Cormon, where years before Émile Bonnard and Van Gogh had studied. He did not stay long, but soon installed himself in the famous studio block called La Ruche, the Beehive, in the Impasse Danzig, moving not long afterwards to a studio in the Cité Falguière. Although he is said not to have been particularly sociable, it is clear that within a short piece of time he was in touch with advanced circles. Chagall and Kissling were friendly with Picasso, Apollinaire, Saint-Draz. Léger had a studio in La Ruche, so did Modigliani. Modigliani became a close friend. Soutine sat for him twice. There can hardly have been a greater contrast between them. Modigliani, handsome, profoundly cultured, his modernity tinctured with Italian sweetness. Soutine, uncouth, persecuted, learning every inch of the way, indifferent to the purely aesthetic statement. As the years went on, Modigliani's self-destructive drinking and drug-taking became more and more an end in itself. He found it harder to work. He was dying of consumption. Just as Soutine must surely have learned from his culture, so he may also have been hardened by Modigliani's personal failure. His own attachment to his work was fanatical, anxious. Although he appears to have suffered from periods of terrible sterility, he did not dodge them, but sweated them out, exploring every nuance of doubt and despair. He had stomach ulcers, the classic symptom of inner suffering, as David Sylvester has remarked. Modigliani introduced Soutine to his dealer, the Polish poet Zborowski. By 1919, Zborowski had begun to help him, and in that year, he provided for him to leave Paris for Cirey, the village in the Pyrenees, where a number of artists, notably Picasso, Gris, and Kissling, had worked for several summers before the war. Soutine was to work at Cirey for the next 4 years, and it was here that he was to paint what were among the most original paintings of the 20th century. An artist's work can be approached from 2 alternative directions. We can stress its place in the context of other art, as innovation, as a contribution to the dialectic of style. Or we can see it as an isolated personal achievement. The first view leads us to reflect on the condition of art at the time. The second leads us to reflect on the content of the pictures themselves and their specific nature. Seen from the broader point of view, a work of originality seems to propose a new definition of art. More narrowly, it suggests an unprecedented testing of the self. An unprecedented testing of the self. We naturally approach an artist's earlier work in terms of its orientation, and the work of his maturity in terms of its inward nature, as though we imagine an artist taking up a stance in relation to his peers, and then turning to discover the implications of this stance, to find what it means to live it out. It is remarkably difficult to apply these two perspectives to Soutine. It can't be denied that his earlier work, above all the landscapes painted at Céret, contains innovations which give it a unique place in 20th century painting. But it is difficult to place these innovations with any precision in the context of the art of the time. And yet, it is not as though Soutine was an isolated figure. He was much less isolated than Chagall, for instance, for all Chagall's Parisian air. On the contrary, he was a complex and, in a way, sophisticated painter of outstanding technical fluency. But he cannot be convincingly related to any movement or manifesto of his time. We find ourselves looking at all his work in terms of its inner necessity, even while we analyze the formal changes that it underwent, and even while we recognize its debt to other painting. His art is supremely personal. He seems to be painting as we look. His pictures seem to be saturated by his presence, to reek of him. I see Soutine's arrival in Paris as a fantastic conjunction. From nothing, a cultural desert, he finds himself in the Louvre, facing Rembrandt, Corot, Courbet, the skill and taste and sumptuousness of centuries. From a closed rural society, he finds himself in an open culture at the climax of half a century of ferment. It is a measure of his stamina and the force of his need for self-definition that he was able to absorb and use so much. Of course, Paris met him halfway. Art itself was in a crisis of self-definition. Style couldn't be described anymore in unified terms, only in personal ones or utopian ones. The cultural mass was splitting up. Quote, a new emphasis lay on the character and the act of the performance behind the work, as Adrian Stokes has reminded us. Because art seemed to be creating culture rather than culture art. The individual's, the artist's achievement with himself could appear to be more stable than society's achievement. Unquote. Thus, Soutine's reading of art was as valid as anyone's. In pulling himself up by his own bootstraps, he had, if anything, an advantage, not a disadvantage, in relation to his Western colleagues. If Paris had been stable, Soutine would have remained an outsider. But just as the dispossessed immigrant in America is in a sense more free to define himself as an American, as well as under greater pressure to do so, than a more fortunate and better rooted one, so it is here. The Paris of Apollinaire was an America of the mind. I'll stop there. Although I do want to read this. We know nothing of what Soutine did as a student at Vilna. It's true. We don't know. All right, I'll stop. I'll pause. It's enough. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Okay. I'll let it go. Having fun reading. You're all making stuff, doing stuff. What a time. Okay. Bye. Be well.